I am NetMoverSitan. Now to cover the lore on the NPCs at the camp where all who die after the tutorial and after each run end up. They each have their own stories. In fact, two have stories which are so intertwined that I'll need to cover them together. So, let us start with Alburn. From what can be gathered, he was a former farmer, and judging from his beehives, the ones he's carrying, a former beekeeper as well. He appeared to be more sociable than the others. He speculated on what the soul tree looked like, and he is the only one that is seen within the labyrinth itself, mostly within the chapel, the crossroads of the sanctuary, where in the past the priests and any pilgrims used to worship. And based on some of the conversations, it would seem that religion increased in importance post-events. Well, if you've been following the lore videos so far, you'll know why, but the short version for those who haven't been watching these in order is... let's just say, after the event, society went back to the Middle Ages, knowledge was lost, and religion increased in importance. He used to make candles out of beeswax, which... let's just say the church bought a lot of them, as they were odorless and didn't spoil their rituals. Much as the church in real life preferred them over tallow candles. He considered tallow candles to smell of cruelty. Oh, and the statues within church buildings were similar to that within the sanctuary itself. Right. Where were we? Oh yeah. Candles. Alburn didn't take more beeswax than he needed, as the bees did the work. Thus, he didn't consider what nature provided to be free. As for his disdain towards tallow candles, and how he considered it cruelty, or rather, they smelled of cruelty, I can understand that, as it would involve killing cows to get the fat to make the tallow, to make the candles, which, in our world, would be a problem for vegans, Buddhists, and especially Hindus, because for them, the cow is a sacred animal. So beeswax is a better alternative, at least based on that in both worlds. He is often laughed at by the others for not giving up hope. He'd probably like a certain song from Monty Python's Life of Brian based on that. Eric Idle. That was a mild example of why the 1970s was referred to as the decade that taste forgot. But it certainly applies to this. Can't stand that song. Anyway, back on topic. He made a lot of bee-related analogies. He was also not a slave to material things. let me put it this way. When he brought Cecil Adder gems, Cecil talks about them, and these weren't the exact words, but the general message talks about making quite a profit. Alban wasn't really that concerned. He cares more about bees, only cutting the capping of the hive, leaving the comb intact. Well, he took into account that the bees did all the work. Although he does have a weakness, and that is for honey. He sometimes takes too much and then feels disgusted when he thinks of what would happen to the bees who work so hard for it. Kind of puts it into perspective, doesn't it? It means that Winnie the Pooh is a sociopath. He always thought that he was free, even when he was told that the water from the Soul Tree would do so. This was after the pirate brood came. He is also more idealistic than the others, seeing all wanderers of the sanctuary as those working towards the same goal. He later considers you a friend, more specifically the character you're playing as, for being able to do so. Although he doesn't stop you when he notices that you don't like to idle away your time. Well, with the amount of food that you need to not be about as weak as Mahatma Gandhi attacking with a feather duster, you need to move quickly too. He believed himself to be unworthy of walking the white path. I don't believe that. He's possibly one of the purest of individuals that could be in the sanctuary. This is because he rarely delved into the tainting rituals. He feared psychopaths, those who didn't show remorse, but may still be guilty. In that case, he should treat all those with positions of power that have a great amount of material reward with suspicion, as they're likely to be psychopaths. He is also an optimistic bloke, as he finds happiness everywhere, including honey butter biscuits. Although that last one isn't a huge surprise, isn't it? Especially as there are no support groups for those with an uncontrollable craving for honey. Yeah, he's fixated by anything associated with bees. Although not to the point of obsession, as he rarely used the taints. He doesn't believe that you should look for evil, as it would always be found. Personally, I think that evil would find you regardless of whether or not you look for it. He also believed that the preparation of soul is what they ought to do, and that they weren't ready for Abacus. Yeah, this was towards the end of a specific run. Unless the developers work on a third ending that deals with that. I'm guessing that this isn't going to happen. It's a cliffhanger not as bad as the Legacy of Kain series or the Half-Life series, but it's still noticeable. With enough deaths and enough progress through talking to him, he gives you his last beeswax candle to show how important you are as a friend. A candle which surprisingly doesn't run out and stays lit as long as you have a capacity to show remorse. They make you work hard to earn friendship, don't they? Too bad reality doesn't work like that. When in some cases, it's near impossible. At the end, at the lift leading down to the Soul Tree, there are two possibilities. Oh, and this will be a spoiler for towards the end, so I thought I'd warn you that in advance. If too many taints are acquired, the pyropes that appear, one for each taint, they swarm around Elburn and overwhelm him, killing him in the process. However, if no taints are acquired, or at least few enough so that remorse is a debuff that can be acquired. For example, if you kill an animal or a lost soul, then he's nowhere to be seen, perhaps due to him already leaving. Or getting killed before he got there. Or it could also be an oversight by the developers. Why did he come to the Sanctuary in the first place? His initial story was that the pirate brood came to his village, burning the fields and killing his bees. Although he was later honest about that. It was actually humans that simply wanted to loot, murder and pillage. Yeah. After that, he travelled to the Sanctuary because, well, he didn't really have anything else to lose. Now we move on to Quora the Scholar. She was the council's high priestess, who also had failing eyesight. She saw, in the context of perception, the tree that grows within the sanctuary as the instrument of knowledge and understanding, and that it was humanity's only hope. She was aware of transmutation, and that it needed Adder to utilize, possibly considering it to be a necessary evil. Yeah. Hypocrisy always finds a way to creep into a religious organization. I mean, just look at the monasteries in England. The corruption within them, which built over the centuries, resulted in King Henry VIII seeing them as ripe targets for plunder, after he decided to cut out the spiritual middleman, known as the Pope, and created the Church of England for his own purposes. Right, back on topic. She spoke of a prophecy that only the tree can cleanse the world and remove the blight. Specifically by drinking from Soulblight. The truth could not be more different. She blesses the souls who volunteer to come inside, and believe that all were equal within the sanctuary. I can understand that position, as all within it are pretty much all imprisoned for eternity, turned into a shell, or a worse fate. Although, that's the worst case scenario. As for how she got there, she was the one who broke the seal by using a rare black steel dagger known as Kronos. Yeah, an addictive weapon that could break something that other post-event weapons could not. Although, she was never meant to enter the sanctuary, and it wasn't meant for her. Yet she was in there anyway. Now that's bitterly ironic. According to her, she believed that she was sent there so that others didn't have to look at the steampunk computer that showed the world as it once was. The same steampunk computer that contained, or rather what should contain, archives written by key individuals within the sanctuary. Although that required you to find her punch cards to complete the archives, which either gave an audio account of events, or it was in Braille, or some other means of reading that didn't require eyesight to be fully working. Punch cards containing the knowledge of the ancients, as she put it, those that lived pre-event, hinting that much time had passed since the event. It was her duty to interpret these punch cards, since her failing eyesight prevented her from studying scriptures. She didn't know whether or not the crystal plague had consumed the outside. Although, she did remember the scriptures, saying that the power to change was within the tree and the tree only. Also that the tree can wash the sins of their fathers away. She believed that the centuries-old wisdom of the tree, in the form of punch cards, would provide answers, and rid the world of the crystal plague. If only she knew the origin of it. She has nothing but disdain for Abacus, the one who seized the tree, who needed to fall, whatever the cost. She believed that remorse would hold you back from cleansing the world. Remember what I said about how Alburn was right to fear psychopaths? She discovered that their civilization was built on the ruins of a previous one. This was written in the scriptures. Scriptures which were based on truth, as in the past, civilization was steampunk Victorian in development. But now, it's back to the Middle Ages. The punch cards confirmed what the scriptures foresaw, although there were some doubts growing, as the scriptures didn't say what was written on some of them. The event that was written was known as the story of origin in the scriptures, but the version in the punch cards, they weren't as the scriptures described them. She found it disturbing, considering it a deception, although trying not to despair. I mean, it goes to show that not all knowledge is healthy. Sometimes knowledge can be harmful to those that find it. I mean, take a real-world example of Das Kapital by Karl Marx. He didn't intend for it to be used in the way it did, but it was used as a partial blueprint for quite a few tyrannical regimes. Right, let's move on to the next one, or rather, the next two. Now we move on to two with an intertwined story. Cecil is... well, the short version is that he's a greedy... The long version is more complicated. As for Brother, he's a simple blacksmith who would rather focus on his work and sell his wares than talk. Although their talents complement each other. Specifically, the selling of goods. One selling a more general range of goods. The other specializing in gear. Right. Cecil's dungeon-crawling paraphernalia emporium. Yes, quite a mouthful. Was what Cecil calls his shop. And as you progress deeper into the sanctuary, his inventory became better. Not to mention cheaper. Why was this? Well, I'll get to that. He was sometimes quite dodgy with his dealings. He was brought back Adur gems, a valuable, if risky, resource. Especially as it's brought to him before they crystallize into pyrope spawn. Yeah, it's hinted that he keeps them rather than destroys them. And no, it didn't sound like he was a gambler. Certainly not with his life. Well, not if he could help it anyway. As for Brother, he'd ask you to find prototype weapons for him in the sanctuary. In order for him to recreate every step the ancestors took to make it them. in order to produce better weapons and armor. Having a high opinion of their craftsmanship, he believes that everything that he made was either divine or sacrilegious. Nothing in between. And he realized that he never made anything divine when he came to the sanctuary. He was humbled by the complexity of the sanctuary's machinery, previously thinking that he knew everything about the art of metal bending. Well, some of us think that we know everything, until we find something that tells us that we don't. Like many in the Soulblight world, he seemed to be quite religious, unable to separate his work from the pursuit of divinity. And even though he knew that all he had was time, he preferred not to waste it. He also cared about the safety of his customers, at least in regards to not wanting even potential customers to get burned due to getting too close to the furnace that he uses to craft his wares. Cecil and Brovir were among the first to come to the sanctuary. They even came together. Each had different avenues to expand into, seeing as there wasn't anywhere else for adventurers to buy things. Although that was more Cecil than Brovir. He was less about the money, and more about making good quality products. He takes pride in his work. Cecil has a high opinion of him, considering him the finest blacksmith in the entire Inner Kingdom, thinking that the Royal Forge pales in comparison to his work. Brovir had an almost fanatical hatred of the pirate brood, especially the devastation they brought onto the land. He ended up in the sanctuary to help others gain access to what could deal with the problem. He knew about the ancestors' capability to make weapons that could shatter the pirate brood. Brovir's hands were burnt so much, due to his work, that he lost all feeling in them. That made gauging the elasticity of metals a problem. Thankfully, Cecil's hands were soft and childlike. Brovir trusted him enough to value the quality of the materials that he used to forge weapons and armor. Which meant that Brovir had a high opinion of Cecil. At least because he supplied only the best materials. As for how Brovir works, well, part of that involved hammering out impurities, adding bear bones, as in bones from a bear, and, rather disturbingly, at least to some of his customers, quenching the blades in the blood of the wielders, all in his search for the divine. Well, that's why he came to the sanctuary in order to find it. Brovir considered it to be a shame when weapons go to waste. Certainly with the case of Yarlow's axe, which no longer needs sharpening due to a lack of use. He considered it to be the greatest honor to listen to a knight well versed in the art of the sword, to cut through the air with one of his weapons. Cecil also pays people to bring back statues from the sanctuary, something mostly for show, although he was willing to pay much for them in order to show off. Cecil becomes increasingly excited when each of the incarnations of Abacus are defeated, deciding to charge you much less than what they'd cost via the vending machines. Cecil considered himself a man of contradictions, which explains why he would sell his goods for less and less, depending on how much progress he made. Cecil has been inside the sanctuary at least once before. Well, once before you arrived in the sanctuary. He was torn between greedy and acquisitive as what best describes him. It left him famished and got himself killed. Either the taints were in a different order in the past, or the psychological effects of the taints got to him. He approved of Brovir putting his insignia on all the armor produced, because he believed that achievements just can't go unacknowledged. Well, he believed that Brovir should take pride in his work, and it's hard to argue against that. As for the reason why Cecil was in the sanctuary, well, he estimated 10% of his property's worth and tried to bribe a royal servant to look the other way. Unfortunately for Cecil, the system was not as corrupt as he thought, and was sentenced to life imprisonment and complete seizure of all his assets. The crime, tax fraud, and an attempt to bribe an official. Personally, I think he got off lightly. In the same cell, he found Brovir, who was sentenced to death. And it's unknown what Brovir did, but it must have been something considered so bad by society that it made tax fraud and an attempted bribe seem mild by comparison. Enough to be seen as a social leper. It might be something more heretical, such as delving into forbidden technologies and or techniques, or perhaps saying one or two things that was considered falling below what was considered acceptable standards. Yeah, sometimes even words can have you burned as a heretic. Cecil didn't see him as a social leper, for one simple reason. Money doesn't discriminate. They then decided to work together in order to break out, with the help of some help that Cecil was somehow able to pay a small fortune for, which was not something that he would do lightly. And they decided to go to the one place where they won't be followed. The Sanctuary. They simply exchanged one dungeon for another. But this was a dungeon that neither wanted to leave, as unlike the previous dungeon, Brovir was not a dead man. Cecil didn't want to leave because it allowed him to conduct business freely, so that one day someone would walk out of the Sanctuary alive and tell stories to the whole world about Cecil the Merchant. He was the wealthiest person in the Sanctuary. To spread the legends of his fortune so that they could say, Cecil, what a life he had. More likely they'd say, Cecil, he's so full of himself, he probably eats gold. What a greedy. As for Brovir, once he has all weapons that he needs to recreate the works of the ancestors, he found out, much to his horror, that the ancestors added adder gems to steel in order to make them indestructible. The same material that the pirate brood are made from. What he thought was divine was the most unholy of things. Which seems to reinforce that the crime or crimes that he was sentenced to death for were religious, as it apparently made his sin seem mild by... Well, yeah, that's an accurate way of describing it. It makes it seem mild, yeah. After this disturbing revelation, he decided to stay in the Sanctuary and keep working on his craft, and hope that humanity can be forgiven for its arrogance. Well, that and outside the Sanctuary, he's a dead man. Then again, Cecil's probably a dead man as well, for breaking out of prison. Lastly, we have Yarlo the Gatekeeper. Not a lot of info on this one. At the start, he was slightly joking when it comes to life. Mostly because staying dead isn't possible within the Sanctuary. He didn't deceive newcomers into thinking that it would be easy for them. Although he did prefer to let them find out for themselves exactly how bad it could be. He also spoke of a great evil that inhabited the Sanctuary, most likely referring to Abacus. He dislikes bees, so he wouldn't like to be around Alburn before what drove him to the Sanctuary. As for why Yarlo is in the Sanctuary, considering that there was someone in a similar helmet in the intro cutscene, he might have been Quora's bodyguard. The wooden sticks meant to represent the soul tree. The sticks in his helmet, I mean. He speaks highly of Brovir, even though he wasn't warm to him at first. Much like with you, when you first interact with him. He has a low opinion on Cecil, however, believing that selling your soul was a safer transaction. There was that taint towards the end. And that's safer? Although he did advise... he advised you to seek out Quora for questions that troubled you. Yeah, there's not exactly a multiple choice option with the questions, is there? That's the thing about NPCs. They have a strict amount of dialogue they can go through before they run out, and they repeat what they say. He was trained to think that defeat meant ground covering the face, something which didn't apply to the Sanctuary. Considering that he was trained, it appeared that he at least had some form of career that required martial training. Training in the art of melee combat. As for what he considered the face of death, that was his own face reflected in the Pirate Brood's crystalline body. He died at least once this way. He was traumatized at the sight of his own death. Upon going into the heart of the Sanctuary, he felt powerless and hesitant to draw his weapon. Yeah, he doesn't believe that the ability to not stay dead makes you invincible. Considering the lost souls, they were once sane, but now they're mostly empty shells. Yeah. He also gave combat advice to those heading into the Sanctuary, if they were willing to stick around long enough to hear him. At the start, he had heard of the tainting rituals from others, but hadn't partaken in them himself. But as he learned more about them from you, he grew more interested in them, paying you in storage expanders to further motivate you. In the end, after hearing about all of the rituals and the power they granted, he desired to be tainted as well. He left the gate open and journeyed into the Sanctuary himself, and wasn't seen again. At least until something is added to expand on his story. Although I think we've already covered how unlikely that is. Well, that took longer than I thought it would. But at least I've gone over all of the characters, the NPC characters at the camp. Well, I couldn't title it Camp Characters, as that might give the wrong message entirely. Anyway, there's just one more lore video that I can think of, unless any of you have any ideas. And then I'm pretty much done with the Soulblight lore, and there'll just be taints guys work on. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!